Have you ever wondered why some people seem completely unbothered by things that make the rest of us break out in a cold sweat? Well, if you're thinking about INFJs, you're onto something pretty fascinating. These rare personality types, making up just 1 to 3% of the population, have a totally different relationship with fear than most folks do. Today, we're diving deep into the mysterious world of INFJs and exploring 8 things that absolutely terrify most people but somehow don't faze these intuitive souls one bit. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll either be questioning everything you thought you knew about fear, or you'll be wondering if you might be an INFJ yourself. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfortable, and let's unpack what makes these fascinating individuals tick when it comes to facing life's biggest scary situations. 1. Being completely alone. Let's start with something that keeps most people up at night, the fear of being totally alone. Now, I'm not talking about spending a weekend by yourself binge-watching Netflix. I'm talking about that deep, existential fear of ending up isolated from everyone and everything you care about. For most folks, this fear is absolutely paralyzing. The idea of having no friends, no family connections, no romantic partner, it's enough to make people stay in toxic relationships or maintain friendships that aren't serving them anymore. People will literally compromise their values and authentic selves just to avoid being alone. But here's where INFJs are different. They don't just tolerate solitude, they actually need it to function properly. While everyone else is frantically trying to fill every moment with social interaction, INFJs are perfectly content spending hours, days, or even weeks in their own company. This doesn't mean they're antisocial or don't value relationships. Actually, it's quite the opposite. INFJs form incredibly deep, meaningful connections with others. But they understand something that most people don't: being alone and being lonely are 2 completely different things. INFJs use their alone time for deep reflection, creative pursuits, and processing all the emotional information they've absorbed from the world around them. They see solitude as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery, not as something to be feared or avoided. What's fascinating is that this comfort with aloneness actually makes INFJs better friends and partners. Because they're not desperately clinging to relationships out of fear, they can show up authentically and give others the space they need too. 2. Deep emotional conversations. Most people run for the hills when conversations start getting really deep and emotional. You know those moments when someone starts sharing their deepest fears, biggest regrets, or most vulnerable thoughts? Yeah, that's when most folks suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be. There's something about raw, unfiltered human emotion that makes people incredibly uncomfortable. Maybe it's because we're not taught how to handle these situations, or maybe it's because deep conversations force us to confront our own emotional stuff that we'd rather keep buried. But INFJs? They're like emotional archaeologists who get genuinely excited about digging into the deep stuff. While everyone else is making small talk about the weather or last night's TV show, INFJs are wondering about your childhood dreams, what keeps you awake at 3 a.m., and how you really feel about the direction your life is heading. This isn't just curiosity, it's a genuine desire to understand and connect with the real person behind the social mask. INFJs have this incredible ability to create safe spaces where people feel comfortable sharing things they've never told anyone else. They're not afraid of tears, difficult topics, or complex emotions. In fact, they're drawn to these conversations because they understand that this is where real connection happens. Surface-level chit-chat feels empty and meaningless to them. What makes this even more remarkable is that INFJs don't just tolerate these deep conversations, they facilitate them. They ask the questions that others are too scared to ask and create an environment where vulnerability feels safe rather than terrifying. 3. Major life changes and uncertainty. Here's something that sends most people into complete panic mode: major life changes and uncertainty about the future. Whether it's switching careers, moving to a new city, ending a long-term relationship, or any other big life transition, most folks find this stuff absolutely terrifying. The fear of the unknown is one of humanity's most primal fears. We like predictability, routine, and knowing what to expect. When life throws us curveballs, our first instinct is usually to resist, avoid, or find ways to maintain the status quo even when it's not serving us anymore. People will stay in jobs they hate, relationships that have run their course, or living situations that make them miserable, all because the fear of change feels worse than the discomfort of their current situation. It's like being stuck in a prison of your own making. But INFJs have a completely different relationship with change and uncertainty. They're natural visionaries who are always looking ahead and imagining different possibilities. While most people see change as a threat, INFJs see it as an opportunity for growth and alignment with their authentic selves. This doesn't mean they make impulsive decisions or change things just for the sake of it. INFJs are actually quite thoughtful about major life transitions. But when they sense that a change is needed for their personal growth or to live more authentically, they're willing to embrace the uncertainty that comes with it. They understand that staying in situations that don't align with their values or life purpose is actually more frightening than facing the unknown. INFJs would rather deal with temporary uncertainty than permanent misalignment with who they're meant to be. Their intuitive nature also helps them navigate uncertain situations. They're good at reading between the lines, picking up on subtle cues, and trusting their gut instincts when logic alone isn't enough to guide them through unclear situations. 4. Standing up for unpopular beliefs. Most people have a deep-seated fear of going against the crowd or standing up for beliefs that might make them unpopular. It's basic human psychology. We want to belong, to be accepted, to fit in with our community. Going against popular opinion feels like social suicide to most folks. This fear keeps people silent when they witness injustice, prevents them from expressing their authentic opinions, and causes them to go along with things they don't actually believe in. The fear of judgment, rejection, or conflict is so strong that many people would rather compromise their integrity than risk standing alone. You see this everywhere, in workplaces where people stay quiet about unethical practices, in friend groups where harmful behavior gets overlooked, in communities where important issues get swept under the rug because nobody wants to be the one to speak up. But INFJs operate from a completely different place when it comes to their values and beliefs. They have this incredibly strong internal compass that guides their actions. And when something conflicts with their core values, staying silent becomes more uncomfortable than speaking up. INFJs are willing to be unpopular if it means staying true to what they believe is right. They'd rather have a few genuine relationships with people who accept their authentic selves than a bunch of surface-level connections based on pretending to be someone they're not. This doesn't mean they're combative or looking for arguments. INFJs typically prefer harmony and will choose their battles carefully. But when something really matters to them, whether it's social justice, protecting someone who's being mistreated, or standing up for an important principle, they'll find the courage to speak up even when it's uncomfortable. What's particularly admirable about INFJs is that they're not trying to impose their beliefs on others or prove they're right. They're simply being authentic to who they are and what they stand for, regardless of how others might react. 5. Being vulnerable and showing weakness. Here's a big one that keeps most people locked behind emotional walls: the fear of vulnerability and showing any sign of weakness. In our culture, vulnerability is often seen as something negative, something that makes you a target or shows that you're not strong enough to handle life's challenges. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to appear like they have everything figured out. They hide their struggles, pretend their lives are perfect on social media, and avoid asking for help even when they desperately need it. The thought of someone seeing them at their lowest point feels absolutely terrifying. This fear of vulnerability keeps people isolated and prevents them from forming genuine connections with others. How can you really know someone if they're always wearing a mask? How can you trust someone who never shows you their real self? But INFJs have a completely different understanding of vulnerability. They recognize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's actually incredible strength. It takes courage to show up as your authentic self, to admit when you're struggling, and to let others see you without all the pretenses. INFJs understand that vulnerability is the birthplace of real connection, creativity, and personal growth. They're willing to share their struggles, admit their mistakes, and show their imperfections because they know this is how genuine relationships are built. This doesn't mean they overshare with everyone they meet or use vulnerability as a way to manipulate others. INFJs are actually quite selective about who they open up to, but when they do decide to be vulnerable with someone, they're not afraid of what that person might think. They've learned that the people who judge them for being real weren't their people anyway, and the ones who accept their vulnerability are the relationships worth investing in. This willingness to be authentic, even when it's uncomfortable, allows INFJs to form incredibly deep and meaningful connections with others. 6. Confronting difficult truths about themselves. Most people have a complicated relationship with self-awareness. Sure, everyone says they want to know themselves, but when it comes to actually confronting difficult truths about their personality, behavior patterns, or life choices, most folks would rather avoid that uncomfortable process altogether. It's so much easier to blame external circumstances, other people, or bad luck when things aren't going well in our lives. Taking an honest look at our own contribution to our problems requires a level of courage that many people simply don't have. This fear of self-examination keeps people stuck in destructive patterns, toxic relationships, and unfulfilling life situations. They'd rather continue suffering in familiar ways than do the hard work of looking inward and making necessary changes. But INFJs are different when it comes to self-reflection and personal growth. They're naturally introspective and spend a lot of time analyzing their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. While this can sometimes lead to overthinking, it also means they're not afraid to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. INFJs understand that personal growth requires honest self-assessment. They're willing to acknowledge their flaws, examine their blind spots, and take responsibility for their part in relationship conflicts or life challenges. This doesn't mean they're masochistic or enjoy beating themselves up. It means they recognize that avoiding difficult truths doesn't make them go away. It just allows problems to fester and grow bigger over time. INFJs see self-awareness as a gift that allows them to make better choices, have healthier relationships, and live more authentically. They'd rather deal with the temporary discomfort of confronting a difficult truth than continue living in denial or delusion. What's particularly impressive about INFJs is their ability to hold space for both their strengths and their areas for growth without getting overwhelmed by shame or self-judgment. They understand that being human means being imperfect, and they're okay with that. 7. Intense emotions and psychological depth. Most people are terrified of intense emotions, both their own and other people's. We live in a culture that promotes emotional suppression, where phrases like, "don't be so sensitive," or "just get over it," are common responses to genuine human emotion. People fear intense emotions because they don't know what to do with them. They worry that if they really let themselves feel their anger, sadness, or fear, they'll be overwhelmed and unable to function. So instead, they numb out, distract themselves, or try to rationalize their emotions away. This fear of emotional intensity keeps people living on the surface of their lives. They miss out on the richness and depth that comes with fully experiencing their humanity, both the beautiful and the painful parts. But INFJs have a completely different relationship with emotional intensity. They don't just tolerate deep emotions. They understand that this is where life's most meaningful experiences happen. They're not afraid to feel deeply even when it's painful. INFJs recognize that emotions, even difficult ones, contain important information. Their sadness might be telling them something needs to change. Their anger might be highlighting an injustice that needs addressing. Their fear might be warning them about a genuine threat. Instead of running from intense emotions, INFJs lean into them. They allow themselves to fully experience their feelings while also maintaining enough perspective to learn from them and make conscious choices about how to respond. This emotional depth also extends to their relationships with others. While most people get uncomfortable when someone else is experiencing intense emotions, INFJs can hold space for whatever someone else is going through without trying to fix it, minimize it, or make it go away. They understand that sometimes people just need to be witnessed in their pain or joy, and they're not afraid to be present for the full spectrum of human emotional experience. 8. Death and the meaning of life. Let's end with perhaps the biggest fear that haunts most of humanity: death and questions about the meaning of life. For most people, thinking about their own mortality or pondering life's deeper mysteries triggers intense anxiety and existential dread. The fear of death is so overwhelming for many people that they spend enormous amounts of energy trying not to think about it. They stay busy, distract themselves, or cling to beliefs that help them avoid confronting the reality of their own mortality. Similarly, questions about life's meaning can feel too big and overwhelming to really engage with. What's the point of it all? Why are we here? What happens when we die? These questions can trigger a kind of existential vertigo that leaves people feeling lost and scared. But INFJs have a unique relationship with these big existential questions. Instead of being terrified by life's mysteries, they're fascinated by them. They're naturally philosophical and spend a lot of time thinking about deeper meanings and purposes. INFJs don't fear death in the same way that most people do because they've spent so much time thinking about what makes life meaningful. They're less concerned with avoiding death and more focused on making sure they're really living while they're here. This doesn't mean they're reckless or don't value life. It means they understand that death gives life meaning and urgency. Instead of being paralyzed by the inevitability of death, they're motivated by it to live more authentically and purposefully. INFJs are also more comfortable with uncertainty about life's big questions. They don't need to have all the answers to feel okay about existence. They're content to live in the mystery while continuing to explore and wonder about life's deeper meanings. The INFJ advantage: why fear works differently. So what is it about INFJs that makes them so different when it comes to these common fears? There are several factors that contribute to their unique relationship with things that terrify most other people. First, INFJs are naturally introspective. They spend a lot of time in their own heads, which means they've had plenty of practice dealing with uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. They're not afraid of their own inner world because they've explored it thoroughly. Second, INFJs have incredibly strong intuition. This gives them a different kind of confidence when facing uncertain or challenging situations. They trust their ability to navigate whatever comes up, even if they can't see the whole picture yet. Third, INFJs are guided by their values rather than by fear. When you have a strong sense of what's truly important to you, many of the things that scare other people become much less threatening. You're willing to face discomfort if it means staying aligned with what matters most. Fourth, INFJs understand that growth requires discomfort. They've learned that avoiding difficult experiences doesn't lead to a better life, it leads to stagnation and regret. So they're willing to lean into discomfort when they sense it will lead to personal development. Finally, INFJs have a different perspective on what's truly dangerous versus what just feels scary. Their intuitive nature helps them distinguish between genuine threats and situations that are just uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Common misconceptions about INFJs and fear. It's important to clear up some misconceptions about INFJs and fear. Just because they're not afraid of these 8 things doesn't mean they're fearless about everything. INFJs have their own unique fears and anxieties, they're just different from what most people worry about. For example, many INFJs struggle with fears around not living up to their potential, disappointing people they care about, or being misunderstood. They might fear losing their independence or being forced into situations that conflict with their values. INFJs also aren't immune to anxiety or stress. In fact, their sensitivity and tendency to absorb emotions from others can sometimes make them more prone to feeling overwhelmed. The difference is in how they relate to and process these difficult experiences. Another misconception is that INFJs are naturally confident or self-assured. Actually, many INFJs struggle with self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Their willingness to face difficult situations isn't necessarily because they feel confident. It's because they've learned that avoiding things doesn't make them go away. Learning from the INFJ approach. Even if you're not an INFJ, there's a lot you can learn from their approach to fear and difficult situations. Here are some key takeaways that anyone can apply to their own life. First, practice getting comfortable with discomfort. Start small, have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding, try something new that makes you nervous, or spend some time alone without distractions. Notice that you can handle more than you thought you could. Second, question your fears. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of and whether those fears are based on actual threats or just uncomfortable feelings. Many of our fears dissolve when we examine them closely. Third, connect with your values. When you're clear about what's truly important to you, it becomes easier to act courageously even when you're scared. Your values can provide the motivation you need to push through fear. Fourth, practice vulnerability in small doses. Share something real with someone you trust. Notice how it feels to be authentic instead of perfect. Build your tolerance for being seen as you really are. Finally, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling fear and taking action anyway. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. The broader impact. Understanding how INFJs relate to fear can help all of us think differently about what we're afraid of and why. It challenges us to question whether our fears are serving us or holding us back from living more authentic, meaningful lives. It also highlights the importance of having different personality types in our communities and organizations. INFJs bring a unique perspective that can help others see beyond their fears and limitations. They model what it looks like to live guided by values rather than fear. At the same time, it's important to recognize and appreciate what different personality types bring to the table. While INFJs might not fear the things we've discussed today, they bring their own challenges and blind spots. The goal isn't for everyone to be like INFJs, but rather to learn from their strengths while contributing our own. Conclusion. So there you have it, 8 things that keep most people up at night but somehow don't faze INFJs in the same way. From being alone to confronting death, these intuitive, values-driven individuals have a completely different relationship with fear than most of us do. What makes INFJs so unique isn't that they're fearless. It's that they've learned to distinguish between real threats and situations that are just uncomfortable. They understand that growth requires discomfort, that authenticity is more important than approval, and that avoiding difficult experiences doesn't lead to a better life. Whether you're an INFJ yourself or just someone who wants to live more courageously, there's something powerful about recognizing that many of our fears are optional. We don't have to be controlled by the things that scare us. We can choose to face them, learn from them, and grow through them. The next time you find yourself held back by fear, remember the INFJ approach. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of, connect with what truly matters to you, and consider the possibility that the thing you're avoiding might actually be the very thing you need to embrace for your own growth and authenticity. After all, the most meaningful parts of life often exist just on the other side of our comfort zones. And sometimes all it takes is a different perspective to realize that what we thought was terrifying might actually be the doorway to becoming who we're really meant to be. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the fascinating world of INFJ fearlessness. What resonated with you? Are there any fears on this list that you'd like to work on overcoming in your own life? Remember, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and choosing to act in alignment with your values anyway.